The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and hope. Ethan Carter sat forward in the plastic chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tight his knuckles had gone white. Across from him, Dr. Reyes held a folder against her chest like she was carrying something fragile. "Mr. Carter," she said, and there was a lightness in her voice he hadn't heard in 7 years. "We've found a heart. It's a match. A strong match." For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. Then the tears came, fast and unstoppable, dripping onto his jeans as he pressed his palms to his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, God. Thank you." "Mr. Carter," Dr. Reyes's voice shifted. "Careful now, measured. There's a complication. Before we can move forward with scheduling, I need to inform you that your financial clearance for the procedure has been declined." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated in the air, disconnected from meaning. "I'm sorry, declined? We've had a dedicated account for this for 7 years. 7 years, Dr. Reyes. I don't understand." "The account shows a balance of $211. The hallway tilted. Ethan heard his own heartbeat in his ears, a frantic drumline that drowned out everything else. "That's not possible," he said. "That's not. There's over $400,000 in that account. I checked it myself 2 weeks ago." Dr. Reyes's expression told him she believed him, and that made it worse. "I'd encourage you to speak with your bank," she said gently, "and with your wife." Ethan sat frozen as she walked away, her footsteps fading down the sterile corridor, leaving him alone with a question that felt like it might crack him in half. Where did the money go? 3 days earlier, the Carter house had been quiet that morning, sunlight slanting through the kitchen window, the smell of pancakes in the air. Olivia had been on her 3rd cup of coffee, scrolling through emails with the particular stillness of a woman trying very hard not to look afraid. None of them knew yet what was coming. None of them knew that in 72 hours, everything, the money, the trust, the family they'd built brick by brick, would collapse into a single, unbearable question. Why would a family that had spent 7 years saving every spare dollar for their son's life suddenly have nothing left? The answer was already in motion. It just hadn't reached them yet. To understand how far they fell, you have to understand what they had. Ethan Carter was the kind of father who remembered things. Not just birthdays, the small things. That Noah liked his grilled cheese cut diagonally, never straight. That he was afraid of the vacuum cleaner until he was 6, and then suddenly wasn't. That he hummed to himself when he colored. Always slightly off key. Always happy. Ethan ran a small contracting business. Mostly kitchen renovations and backyard decks. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and steady mattered more than most people gave it credit for. Every night, without fail, he read to Noah before bed. Dinosaurs, mostly. Noah had an encyclopedic memory for dinosaur names that put most adults to shame, and he'd correct his father's pronunciation with the solemn authority of an 8-year-old professor. "It's Pachycephallosaurus, Dad. You always mess it up." "My mistake, Professor." Noah would grin, that gap-toothed grin that made the whole world feel lighter for a second, and settle back against his pillow. He'd been born with a congenital heart defect so severe that the first pediatric cardiologist they saw had gently suggested they prepare for the possibility that he wouldn't make it to 5. He was 8 now. Every year past that first bleak prognosis had felt like a small, defiant miracle. But miracles have expiration dates. Noah's heart was failing, slowly, and then not so slowly, and the only path forward was a transplant. A transplant that cost more money than either of them had ever imagined they'd need to raise. Olivia was the one who'd built the machine that made it possible. She'd started her marketing firm 11 years earlier, in a spare bedroom with a laptop and a stubborn refusal to fail. She'd built it into something real: 40 employees, a downtown office, clients who trusted her name. She worked long hours, later than she wanted to, later than felt fair to Noah and Ethan. But every dollar she made beyond the household expenses went into one place: the transplant fund. 7 years of birthday money, holiday bonuses, tax refunds, freelance side jobs Ethan picked up on weekends, a portion of every invoice Olivia's company collected. $411,000. painstakingly assembled dollar by dollar, like a cathedral built one stone at a time. They didn't talk about the fund much at the dinner table. It sat in the background of their lives like a held breath. The thing that made everything else possible. The thing they were all, in their own way, protecting. On a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks before everything broke, the three of them sat at the kitchen table playing Uno, and Noah slapped down a draw 4 with such gleeful malice that Ethan groaned and Olivia laughed so hard she nearly knocked over her wineglass. "You're a menace," Ethan said. "I'm a legend," Noah corrected. Olivia watched her son's face flushed with laughter, alive in a way that felt, in that moment, permanent in thought. This is what all of it is for. Every late night, every missed dinner, every ounce of exhaustion. This. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She almost didn't look, but something about the buzzing insistent. 3 times in a row pulled her eyes toward it. The name on the screen was her CFO. She excused herself from the table, still smiling, still warm from the game. By the time she reached the hallway and answered, her smile was already gone. "Olivia," her CFO said, voice tight. "We need to talk. Tonight, if you can." It's the Meridian contract they're pulling out. And if they pull out, the bank's going to call the loan. Olivia leaned her forehead against the cool wall of the hallway, listening to Noah's laughter still ringing from the kitchen, and felt the floor of her carefully built life begin, quietly, to give way. The next 48 hours were a controlled demolition. Meridian, her firm's largest client, terminated their contract without warning, citing budget cuts higher up their own corporate chain. It wasn't personal. It didn't matter that it wasn't personal. Meridian represented nearly 60% of the firm's revenue, and its absence tore a hole straight through the company's finances. By Wednesday morning, 3 of her senior staff had heard whispers and were quietly polishing their resumes. By Wednesday afternoon, her operations manager asked her directly, in the hallway, voice low, "Are we going to make payroll next month?" Olivia didn't have an answer. That terrified her more than anything. She called the bank, the loan officer she'd worked with for 6 years, a man who'd once sent her a bottle of champagne when she hit her first million in annual revenue, was apologetic, but immovable. "Olivia, I want to help you, I do. But the numbers don't support another extension. Corporate's already flagged the account. If Meridian's gone, and there's no new capital coming in, I can't get this past underwriting. What if I could show new revenue? Give me 60 days. I can give you 48 hours before this goes to review. After that, it's out of my hands. 48 hours to save 11 years of work. 40 employees who depended on her. Employees with mortgages, with kids in daycare, with lives built on the assumption that Friday's paycheck would clear. She tried everything a rational, capable person tries. She called 3 investors she'd cultivated relationships with for years. 2 didn't return her calls. The third, a private equity contact named Marcus, listened for 20 minutes and then said, not unkindly, "The market's spooked right now, Olivia. Nobody's writing checks for a firm that just lost 60% of its revenue overnight. I'm sorry. Truly." She sat in her car in the parking garage after that call and didn't cry. She was too far past crying. She just sat there, engine off, hands on the wheel, running numbers in her head over and over like a rosary. 40 employees, 40 families, 11 years. And somewhere in that spiral, a thought arrived that she immediately hated herself for having. The transplant account. She didn't act on it. Not that day. She drove home, made dinner, helped Noah with his math homework, kissed Ethan goodnight, and lay awake until AM staring at the ceiling, doing everything in her power to unthink the thought. But by Thursday, the numbers had gotten worse, not better. Payroll was due in 6 days. Bridge financing had fallen through, and underwriting's 48-hour clock was ticking down to its final hours. She sat at her desk that night long after the office had emptied out, staring at 2 account numbers on her screen. One held $411,000 meant to save her son's life. The other showed a projected negative balance that would end the company. She'd spent 11 years building and put 40 families out of work with almost no warning. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself Noah wasn't on the transplant list yet. There was no matching donor, no surgery scheduled, nothing imminent. She told herself she had time. She told herself, with the particular cruelty of a mind under siege, that saving the company was saving Noah, that his father needed a stable home, that they needed her income too, that this was somehow in some warped calculation, protecting the whole family rather than betraying it. She refused the thought once, closed the laptop, went home. She refused it again at midnight, pacing her kitchen while Ethan slept upstairs, unaware. But at 2:47 a.m., alone in the blue light of her laptop screen, exhausted past the point of good judgment, terrified in a way she'd never been terrified before, Olivia Carter opened the Transplant fund and initiated a transfer of $390,000 into her company's operating account. Her hand trembled over the keyboard. "I'll replace it," she whispered to the empty kitchen, to no one, to herself. "Before anyone finds out, I'll replace every dollar." She hit confirm. Somewhere in that transaction, in that single, catastrophic keystroke, a mother who loved her son more than her own life made the one decision that would nearly cost him everything. The transfer completed at 2:49 a.m. 3 days later, the phone rang at 9:14 in the morning. Ethan was the one who answered, and Olivia would remember the exact shape of his face changing as he listened. Surprise, then disbelief, then a joy so pure it looked almost like pain. "They found a donor," he said, hand over the receiver, eyes wide and shining. "Olivia, they found a match, a perfect match. They want to schedule the surgery immediately." For one suspended moment, Olivia let herself feel it too, the relief, the miracle. 7 years of waiting collapsing into this single sentence. Then the moment cracked, and underneath it was only dread, cold and total. She excused herself to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled up the Transplant account on her phone, with hands that wouldn't stay steady. $211. She'd meant to move money back. She'd meant to secure a bridge loan against the business, quietly replenish the fund before anyone ever needed to look at it, and let this become a secret she carried alone forever. One final burden to spare her family from. She'd told herself she had time. She hadn't accounted for a donor heart arriving 3 days later, indifferent to her plans, indifferent to her guilt, arriving exactly when it was needed and finding the account that was supposed to be waiting for it hollowed out. She called the bank. No new lending was possible on such short notice, not with the company's current standing. She called 2 more investors, her voice cracking in a way she couldn't fully control. Both said no. She tried, absurdly, to see if she could liquidate her retirement account fast enough. The penalties were brutal, the timeline impossible. The bank couldn't process it before the hospital's window closed. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. And outside the bathroom door she could hear Ethan already on the phone with his mother, voice bright with joy, telling her the news. She had to tell him. There was no version of the next few hours where she didn't have to tell him. She found him in the kitchen, phone still in his hand, grinning in a way she hadn't seen in months. "Ethan." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I need to tell you something." He must have heard it in her tone, because his smile faltered before she'd said another word. "The fund," she said. "The Transplant fund. It's Ethan. It's gone. I used it for the business. I was going to replace it. I swear to you I was going to replace every dollar before." "Gone." He said the word like it was a foreign language he was trying to translate. "What do you mean, gone?" "The company was collapsing. 40 people were going to lose their jobs. I thought I had time. I thought." "Olivia." His voice was very quiet now, quieter than she'd ever heard it, quieter than shouting would have been. "Is Noah's money gone?" She couldn't answer. Her silence was the answer. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, not with rage, though rage might have been easier to bear, but with something that looked almost like grief for a person who was still standing in front of him. Then he turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word, and the sound of the front door closing behind him was the loudest thing Olivia had ever heard in her life. Ethan didn't go far. He sat in his truck in the driveway for 20 minutes, hands on the wheel, breathing through something that felt too large for his chest. Then he did the only thing he knew how to do. He started fighting. He called the hospital first, asking how long they could hold the donor organ, how much flexibility existed in the timeline. Not much, he was told. Organs didn't wait. There was a matching window measured in hours, not weeks, and other names on the list who could take Noah's place if the Carters couldn't move fast enough. So Ethan sold his truck. The truck he'd used for 12 years of jobs. The truck with his kids' handprints pressed into dried concrete still sitting in the flatbed from a project years ago. A buyer he found through a contractor friend paid him $22,000. Cash same day, no questions asked. Because Ethan didn't have the luxury of negotiating, it wasn't enough. Not close. He went through the house that night with the folder of family heirlooms, his late father's watch, his grandmother's wedding ring that had been saved for Noah's future someday, tools passed down through 3 generations of Carter men who'd built things with their hands. He sold what he could to a pawn shop on the edge of town, watching a stranger appraise his family's history in cold, clinical numbers. 12,000 more. He called old friends, men he'd worked construction with for 15 years, men who owed him favors, men who'd always said, anything you need, just ask. Most gave what they could, 500 here, 1,000 there, small stones thrown at an avalanche. It added up to something, but nowhere near what was needed. The math simply didn't work. He was trying to rebuild a mountain with pebbles. That evening, exhausted, his hands raw from carrying boxes of tools out to his truck. The truck that wasn't his anymore, that he was driving one last time to make the delivery. He stopped by Noah's hospital room. Noah was sitting up in bed, 4 taped to the back of his small hand, coloring a picture of a stegosaurus with the calm, oblivious faith of a child who trusted his parents completely. Dad. Noah looked up, eyes bright. Is my new heart coming? Ethan felt something break and rebuild itself simultaneously inside his chest. Yes, buddy, he said. And he made himself smile, made it look easy, made it look certain. Yes, it's coming. He stayed another 10 minutes, laughing at Noah's stegosaurus facts, promising to bring his colored pencils from home. Then he stepped out into the hallway, walked until he found an empty stairwell, and sat down on the cold concrete steps and cried until his whole body shook. Time was running out, and love, it turned out, was not always enough by itself. Sometimes it needed money behind it, and the money simply wasn't there. The next morning, Ethan made his final decision. The house, the one asset left that carried real weight. The home he and Olivia had bought together 14 years earlier. The home where Noah had taken his first steps, where birthday candles had been blown out year after year, where every wall held some small history of their family. He met with a real estate investor who specialized in fast, distressed sales, the kind of buyer who purchased homes in days instead of months, at a steep discount, for people who had run out of time to negotiate. Ethan signed the papers in a coffee shop parking lot, hands steady now, because there was nothing left to decide. There was only the doing of it. He wasn't doing it for revenge. He wasn't doing it to punish Olivia, or to prove a point, or to be the hero of some story he'd tell later. He was doing it because somewhere between the truck and the heirlooms and the hospital stairwell, it had become simple in a way almost nothing in his life had ever been simple. Noah was worth everything he had, so he gave everything he had. Olivia found out about the house sale from the real estate agent, a courtesy call to confirm details before closing, and something in her finally, completely broke. Not guilt, though the guilt had been there for days, gnawing and constant. This was something different. She drove to the house and stood in the driveway watching Ethan carry boxes to a rented storage unit, watching him give away, piece by piece, the physical architecture of the life they'd built, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived far too late, that she had spent years protecting the wrong thing. She had been so terrified of losing the company, the income, the identity she'd built as someone who succeeded, someone who provided. She had convinced herself that protecting that version of herself was the same as protecting her family. She had let fear rewrite her definition of what mattered. Ethan had never once needed to be told what mattered. He'd known it instantly, instinctively, without a moment of the agonized calculation that had consumed her for days. Noah's heart. Nothing else came close. She walked up to him in the driveway, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know it doesn't bring back what I took. But I need you to know I understand now. I understand what I almost cost us. I was so afraid of losing everything I'd built that I nearly lost the only thing that ever actually mattered. Ethan didn't forgive her in that moment that would come slower, in pieces, over months, maybe years. But he nodded, once, and let her pick up a box and carry it with him. That afternoon, the combined funds, what remained of the truck money, the heirlooms, old friends' contributions, and now the house sale, cleared the hospital's financial office with barely hours to spare before the donor window closed. Noah was prepped for surgery that evening. Olivia and Ethan stood together outside the operating room, not touching, not speaking, watching the double doors close between them and their son. The waiting room clock moved with the cruelty specific to hospitals. Each minute stretched thin, each hour an eternity built from smaller eternities. Ethan and Olivia sat 3 feet apart, close enough to share the silence, not yet close enough to share comfort. 6 hours passed, then 7. At the 8-hour mark, Dr. Reyes walked through the swinging doors, mask pulled down around her neck, and something in her posture made both of them rise to their feet at once. She looked at them for a long moment before she spoke, and in that pause, Olivia felt her entire life balance on a blade's edge. The surgery was successful, Dr. Reyes said. Noah's new heart is beating well. He's going to need time to recover, but he's going to be okay. Olivia's knees nearly gave out. Ethan caught her, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they held onto each other, crying into each other's shoulders in the middle of a hospital hallway. Grief and relief and love tangled together into something too large to name. Months later, on a Saturday morning bright with early autumn sun, Noah Carter ran across a soccer field for the first time in his life. Really ran, full speed, lungs and heart working together the way they were always meant to, laughing as he chased a ball he had no real interest in catching, just delighting in the pure fact of motion, of breath, of being alive without limits. Olivia no longer owned her company. It had folded within weeks despite everything. The damage too extensive by the time the transplant fund was restored to save it. She'd started over, taking a marketing role at a smaller firm, building slowly, quietly, without the same hunger that had once consumed her. Ethan no longer owned the house they'd raised Noah in. They rented a smaller place across town now, walls bare of the old family photos, tools packed away in storage they were slowly buying back, one piece at a time as money allowed. But on that soccer field, watching their son run with the heart that wasn't originally his, but was fully, completely his now, none of that seemed to matter at all. Olivia watched Ethan cheer from the sideline, watched Noah wave at them both between plays, gap-toothed grin as wide as the sky, and she understood something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Money can rebuild a company. A career can start over. A house is just walls and a roof, replaceable in time. But there are moments in life that never come twice. We almost learned that too late. Noah scored his first goal 12 minutes later, threw his arms up in triumph, and ran straight into his parents' waiting arms.